Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Happy Friday to another episode of the PN Learning Series. Happy New Year. This is the second episode for 2023. It's been a pretty rough year to start with a lot of layoffs. So I'm glad to see many of you are still joining us to level up your career. So today we have a very exciting topic. But before we start, please introduce yourself, where you're joining us from. Say hi in the comments and any questions that you might have for Mo. So before we start, just a quick intro. My name is Shavi. I'm the product manager at LinkedIn. The Product Management Learning Series is a series of live streaming events where we leverage LinkedIn Live to interview industry thought leaders and product practitioners about their PM career journeys and lessons learned along the way, as well as best practice to inspire current and aspiring PM like you to level up your product career. So make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, which you can find the link from my profile in the feature section to receive recap of key takeaways from today's event, as well as updates on future events. Like I said, 2023 has been a very rough start with a lot of massive tech layoffs. So we wanted to be helpful and supportive. So I'm teaming up with Phil Terry, who's a well-known product leader in the field, to kick off a 4-part special job search series for those who are looking out for product jobs. We're kicking off our first episode next Thursday with Marty Kagan to talk about a social search approach called Never Search Alone to maximize your chance of landing the right product job for you. So make sure you check it out. Again, the link you can find from my profile, from the newsletter. I'm looking forward to seeing many of you there. Now, without further ado, today with me, I have a very exciting guest. Moe Ali is the founder and CEO of Product Faculty, North America's most advanced product management training institute, specifically designed for senior product leaders. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mo. I've seen a lot of YouTube videos of you interviewing, top product leaders, and it's really exciting to have you here to talk about a topic that we are both are very passionate about: crafting compelling product strategy. So can't wait to hear from you, and hopefully, you can teach us over the 3,000 PMs that you already train, from top companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Shopify, and really learning from you.
Shavi, I'm excited to be here, and I just want to call out and thank you for running this series. Having done events like this is so much work and so much goes into it. So, on behalf of the entire product management community, thank you for bringing all leaders together and running these events and sharing this knowledge. So, appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. I appreciate that too. All right, let's say hi to some of our folks. So we have folks joining us from Dubai, from India, Chicago, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Pakistan, Missouri, Nigeria, Seattle, Zurich. So this is a very, very Chance have been joining us. Probably, I don't know how many episodes have Chance joined, but it's definitely a repeated, viewer of this series. So thank you so much for joining us from Seattle and New York. It's a very Jordan, very, very global community. Mo, let me have the pleasure to kickstart our conversation and continue to inspire this global community of product builders and product managers. All right, maybe let's get started. Tell us a little bit about your career journey. What was your path to product management?
Yeah, sure. So, like most people, I got into product management by accident. I actually did engineering at the University of Waterloo. And when I graduated from engineering, I got a job as a process engineer at DuPont. And I was in this factory as a process engineer and frankly, not very happy. I'm like, I don't want to be in a factory. So I want to do something more business oriented. And I didn't know what that was. Do I want to do marketing? Do I want to do strategy? Do I want to do something else? So I was lucky to join this leadership development program at one of Canada's largest telcos that allowed me to rotate into different groups. So strategy sounded very sexy. So I'm like, oh, let me do that. So I went into the strategic role and I was doing this role, building these strategy decks, and getting very frustrated because all the strategy was not getting implemented. So we build these decks, pass it on to our internal stakeholders, and then it wouldn't get done, or it would take a time for it to get done. So then my mentor said, "Hey, why don't you come and join this product team?" I was like, "Sure, I don't know what product is. Let me go try this out." Joined product, and I fell in love with it because not only did you come up with the strategy, you also get to implement it and you see the results of it. And so that feedback loop was infectious for me. And that was 14 years ago, and I've been doing it ever since. So that's where I started in product. After working at my first job at Bell, then I went to started my first startup, which was a failure, but I learned a lot from that failure that allowed me to get a really cool role, to work at Canada's largest online retailer. So basically, half of all the food in the country goes through one of the Loblaw companies. And they said, "Hey, you know what? Let's launch online grocery." And I was the first product lead on that business. Helped to launch that business from ground up to about $1 billion in revenue in 6 years. Really saw everything. A new business being launched and growth and experimentation and all that fun stuff. And the messy middle of product development happened during that time, at Loblaw Digital, and our team expanded from me to 35 PMs. That was really kind of my love of product came into fruition there, and going to a 0 to 1 product. After I did that, I said, okay, I was able to launch a product that was 0 to 1 for a very well-funded company. Can I do this for myself? So I went and launched my own startup, which was Airborne, and it was an B2B email automation tool. Launched it with a bunch of brilliant founders, and did that for about a year, and then we got bought out by Demand Science, which is a $100 million data company. So that was really good. And while I'm doing this, I was also teaching product management, at this other place, about 7 years ago. And while I was teaching there, I felt this program was really great, but it was designed to help you land a job in product management. It wasn't helping me on the role. And that's really where I started product faculty to, once you have landed the job, how do you do well on that job? And I've been running product faculty for the last 7 years now, 4 years full time, and 3 years while I was working at other places. Sort of my history into product.
That's awesome. What I love about your story is how you highlighted like the various stage of companies that you work for, right? B2B, B2C, scaling 0 to 1, founding your own company, and then luckily most of them are successful, right? It's either being sold or you managed to grow and scale and launch. So it's very exciting.
A few failed
That
as well. That's
Of
okay.
course, of course. But I think those just adds like so much more perspective into, what you're going to tell us, right?
Yeah.
I just want to say hi to a couple more folks. Joe from Paris, Farouk from Iran, Mexico City, Berlin, DC, Jersey, Houston, Taiwan. Wow, Phoenix and
Wow.
Guatemala. Really, really cool. I also resonated with one thing that you said, and I think our our listeners have like also resonate with like strategy sounded really sexy. I remember as I reflected on my career, I started out doing consulting work similar to you. Like I propose and recommend strategy, but it's on some PowerPoint deck being printed out and then put on shelf somewhere else. I wasn't sure when and how it's going to implement it. So it's really, really exciting to see how you are transitioning into like, owning that vision and executing that end to end, that feedback loop, as you talked about. Now, without further ado, let's dive in. So I think there are a lot of material actually out there in the market that teaches people how to do strategy. Hey, step 1, step 2, step 3. I think the more effective way to learn is probably by looking at, what are some mistakes, some common pitfalls that companies are making, even at large companies, right? With a lot of resources, strong network effects, reputable brands, and great talent. What, in your opinion, what are some pitfalls and top mistakes that you see company, go wrong when it comes to launching product?
Yeah, let's talk about some of these pitfalls. So there's a lot of great books written about product strategy, and I recommend getting into this topic and really becoming an expert over the long term. When you read these books, they'll say things like, "You got to build a strong network effect," or "It's great talent," or "BHAG, set big goals." But then why is it so that companies that have strong network effects, reputable brands, great talent that set big goals still launch failed products. Google Plus, social media network, or Twitter Spaces, all right, or Twitter Stories, right? Even LinkedIn Stories. What's happening here? Why are these big companies that have all these great talented employees and so on and so forth, launching failed products? Well, the essence of this, which is going to come a little bit later, really just comes down to look, it takes more than just a big brand or a reputable brand, strong network effects. It really takes what we call the essence of product strategy. It comes down to uh, don't compete, contrast instead against the biggest complaint that your customer has. And without that big complaint, forget it. You're not going to be able to win over your customers. Doesn't matter how big your brand is, doesn't matter how many resources you have, how many awesome employees you have. You're going to be like Google Plus, social media network, or Twitter, stories, and so on and so forth. Happy to dig more into that if you like.
Yes, absolutely. Let's talk more. So
Okay.
you were saying don't complain, contrast instead. Is that what I'm hearing it right?
Yeah, don't compete, contrast
Compete.
instead.
Okay. Okay, can we double down on that? Like what and then you mentioned also the keywords that I heard was essence of a strong product strategy. I
Yeah,
bet that's part of it, but can you elaborate? Also, every time when you bring an example, Google
yes,
Plus, for example, always bring it to life. So if you can just give us some example case study to illustrate the essence of product management or a strong product strategy, I think
sure.
that would really help us to grasp.
Yeah, let's take the example of Google Plus, right? Google tried to many years ago launch a social media network, right? And they ended up failing at launching that social media network. Now, if you analyze this through the lens of don't compete, contrast against your customer's biggest complaint, if you think about the alternative, which was Facebook, right? Was there really a big complaint against Meta at that point about the social media network early on in the early days? I mean, I know some people don't like Facebook or Meta, but for the most part, it's fine. There was no big complaint against Facebook as a social media network. It was doing the job fine. And that's where, Google launching Google Plus, what does Google Plus offer that Facebook didn't, right? There was no big complaint. Let's take the example of LinkedIn stories, right? Like LinkedIn launched stories. If you think about Instagram stories, it's doing the job. I get my update and I know what people are doing in their personal lives. What was the new thing? What was the big complaint against even Twitter stories, right? It wasn't anything there. So that's really where, if there isn't a big complaint against the existing way of doing things, you're going to find it very difficult to gain traction. Let's look at a successful example, ChatGPT. Why has it taken off like wildfire? It's taken off with wildfire. If you look at any single one of these segments, marketing and content marketing, SEO, sales, email generation, productivity, essay writing, all of these segments have such big complaint against the existing way of doing things, right? Like it's very hard to write sales copy. It's very difficult to do your homework when it comes, and ChatGPT can do that. Marketing content, it's those are very difficult things to do. There's a huge complaint against it, and with ChatGPT, they came and solved it in a really compelling way. So, and it's growing like wildfire. So really, if there's a big complaint against the existing way of doing things, doesn't matter if you have no presence, you're going to grow like wildfire. Think about ChatGPT, OpenAI. They've never launched a 0 to 1 product, right? They have, I mean, aside from Sam Altman having credibility, right? Like they have very, $1 billion in funding is a lot, not less than what Google has or LinkedIn has, right? But they launched a product that had solved a big complaint, and they're growing like wildfire, and that's really key to it.
Yeah, I love that. I think the big complaint is basically the two things that we talked about, like how painful, how big is the problem, and how pain is the pain, right?
Yeah.
I think one LinkedIn user, Shania, also said, in essence, there's a job to be done before you need to go into building product strategy. I wanted to double down on like if the essence of building product strategy is to have this big complaint, so that that you are actually creating something new, differentiating to help challenge the existing way of doing things. Can we double down on the contrast aspect that you mentioned? And can you elaborate a little bit about that? Like the Google Plus example, right? Facebook's
Yeah.
doing really well. Should Google just not tap into that space, or how should they think about it?
Yeah. So let's talk about the contrast against a complaint, right? So um if you aren't able to find a contrast that is strong enough that people are complaining about, you're going to have lackluster growth. So if you happen to be in that situation, what do? Well, you go further. You try to find something. You try to find something that is going to be compelling that allows people to really latch on to what you're building, and don't launch until you do find that. To give you another example, we work with lots of different product managers at lots of different companies, and some of them are launching 0 to 1 products, and when we look at, say, hey, the existing market, like, what are you launching that's compelling, that's differentiated, that is going against a big complaint? And they say, well, we don't have anything, but we're a large company. We've got lots of resources, a big brand. That's only going to take you so far. And as we saw with the example of Google Plus and Twitter Stories, right? That's not enough. It's good to have those things, but strong company performance and is not enough for you have to have a big complaint that you're going after. What do you do if you don't have that? Wait till you do, like, or go further, do more discovery to the point that you can get something that is a little bit more compelling. Otherwise, you're just going to get average growth.
Right, right. Um, I would like to transition to the next topic, but before I close, maybe do you have any quick pointers? You mentioned about discovery, like any other tactical steps that you think as a senior PM, we can do to like figure out what is that big complaint, what is that contrast, and building confidence and conviction towards it.
Yeah, I want to share some thoughts about doing strategy discovery, right? Like when you're a PM, an individual contributor, and you want to guide your company's strategy, it can be hard having strategic discussions with folks that are more senior to you. You're going to encounter difficulty. There's going to be emotions that are involved in these discussions. And so, some tips on really standing out is to get all of your stakeholders to converge on a shared worldview. So instead of coming in and being like, hey, you know what? I've done my own analysis and this is what our fancy strategy should be, instead, align on a worldview, create a document, and really summarize all the assumptions that you have right now. For starters, who are your customers? What's your value proposition? What are the headwinds? What are the tailwinds? What are the big complaints? By asking these questions, you can get your stakeholders in even more senior than you aligned on their worldview, which can get them to move to the direction that you want, as opposed to the other way of being like, hey, I know it all, and I want you guys to do this thing because I think this is right. So those are some sort of tactical tips and questions that you can ask to guide your strategic discussions.
Yeah, I love how you're talking about using an approach and lay out the assumptions so that it invites the team to come together for that discussion versus just say like I know it all. This is what I propose. You listen or I try to convince you. So there's a couple pointers from our audience. One is, hey, I'm going to execute this amazing strategy. In reality, it failed for various reasons, which we will touch upon next in our question.
Yeah.
And then we also have one person, Dean, that mentioned about that asked questions about how do you approach strategy for an established product that doesn't have a strategy. I think the essence of that is, let's say if you're working on a team that doesn't have a strategy and you coming in, like your approach is to invite people, right, to have this conversation. But what
Yeah.
if, your team is building in the wrong direction that you disagree, and then you are coming in and you feel like it won't be successful? How would you go about evangelizing, and getting buy-in for something either it's the wrong direction that you believe in or something that's a little like still ambiguous, right? How do you build a team to like be
Rally
with
around
you
that.
together and align with your vision?
Yeah, so that depends on how long you've spent at the company. If you have spent a long time, you've built credibility, what I call it your trust battery. You have a trust battery. Your battery is full if you've delivered successful products that have done well in the market and people trust you in the organization. If your trust battery is zero, you don't have any trust, you haven't delivered anything, you would take a different strategy. So if you're brand new to the company, right, and your trust battery is at zero because you've done nothing, right? You've achieved nothing. You haven't delivered significant things. Then I would focus on the worldview that you've built, right? Like getting alignment on worldview and those questions that we talked about. If you happen to be in the category where your trust battery is at 80%, there is credibility, you've done things in the past, you've delivered successfully, you can now start to leverage that trust to try to move your organization to the right direction. And so you can say, hey, look, I've done these things in the past, right? You are using some of the trust, some of your cachet, some of the risks that you've built up to propose this new way and create a compelling vision that aligns to the contrast that you think that exists, right? So that's what I would say. Really taking risks, using the trust that you've accumulated, and using that charge to go towards a visionary direction that talks about that highlights a contrast in the market, and that will take risk, of course.
Definitely. Speaking of trust, how do you get a better gauge of like how well people trust you? Because I think it really depends on, like you said, tenure within the company. Let's say if you're a new PM coming in, um, maybe your designer or your engineer or your leaders or your team might or might not trust you. How do you gauge that? And like, what tactical stuff do you do? Do you ask the question? Do you sense it? Do you ask their opinion and then kind of incorporating it? Yeah, like especially for I guess like new PM or new BPM who's like newly promoted to senior or join a new company, join a new team. What are some quick wins that they can tap into to build that trust and credibility?
Yeah. So you're the first 6 months on a new role, you're building trust. Like, assume you don't have it, right? You're new to the organization. You don't know anything really about the customer, about the product, about the organization. And so assume that you don't have that trust. The quickest way that you can use to build trust is to ask great questions, right? Instead of making suggestions, hey, we should do this, we should do that, aligning on key questions, shared view, aligning on assumptions that you have, can be incredibly helpful. What that does is even the questions that you ask and the way that you ask those questions, people will start to think in the way that you're thinking, and that can help guide them. Right? The fastest way to deliver value is to ask really smart, intelligent questions that gets your stakeholders to think and align on where you want to go. What you will find is that these key things that you're asking questions on, they haven't even thought about. They're more ambiguous than they need to be. And because you're the person asking questions, you have that center of gravity there and you're building that trust.
Love that. Great questions are the answers.
It's
Yeah, I think in many ways, asking great questions is an important skill. I think to be able. Sometimes it's harder than even like figuring out the answer because once you get the question right, it kind of
yeah.
sets the tone, sets the direction. Um, do you have any advice on like how people can figure out how to ask those amazing questions?
Yeah, so asking the right questions starts from active listening, and really active listening. If you're listening properly, you should be exhausted. Actually, listening properly is more tiring than speaking, right? And most people don't do that. Most people aren't exhausted. Most people are listening with trying to think about what they're going to say. So when you begin by actively, genuinely listening to your stakeholders, you can get a lay of the land. Based on that lay of the land, you can start to form a point of view of where things should go. And once you have that point of view, then you craft your questions based on that point of view, and you either prove or disprove the questions that you came up with. So number one, active listening. Number two, form a point of view. And number three is prove or disprove your point of view by the questions that you ask.
That's a great. Always listen first. A quote I like to use is we have 2 ears and one mouth. So
Yeah,
that's the ratio of how much you should listen and how much you should speak. Um,
totally.
I want to double down on a couple more questions from the audience. I think if I understand this question correctly, It's more around the specific techniques that you use when it comes to, let's say, building a portfolio of different type of products within the company, right? How do you think about the strategy, the product strategy around that when you have different type of offerings and delivering a cohesive, vision, and then set like tailored to different top like target customer persona that might have slightly different, needs, and price point. And then how do you continue to drive penetration into that market and growth within that market?
Yeah, so really around like this is really expansion strategy. How do you expand to new segments and drive penetration for your core product, right? So the very first step is to have product market fit on a core area, and have revenue coming from that. Once you have that, then you're looking for adjacent markets that are the most closely tied to what you're doing, right? The more closely tied it is, and the bigger the opportunity that you're going after, the more successful that you're going to be. So the key is to find those adjacent markets that are the most closely tied to your core persona, and then try to get to your retention curves to be as strong as possible in those. And once you've done that, you've hit your benchmarks. You move on to the next segment that's mostly close in, then you go to the next one, and so on and so forth. All of that is going to help strengthen your core offering as well, because you're getting more users to be aware of whatever it is that you're building.
That's a great way. Finding product market fit first, and then double down into specific market
Yeah,
scaling.
it's closely tied.
Now, we have limited time. It's almost coming up at a half hour mark, but I do wanted to ask Mo one last question around strategy. um, a lot of us are always thinking about, hey, how can we be more strategic,
Yeah,
what are some practical tips on like a day-to-day or weekly basis? You mentioned about listening, asking good questions, but just like anything else that you think folks can do to level up their strategic thinking skills, so that they can build better product, and then also accelerate their career growth. And how you have experience working at different stage of companies and building your own company. How does that advice differ if you're like a startup founder, startup early PM, a PM at a very mature company? Yeah, love to hear some practical
totally.
tips.
Yeah, so I'll give three practical tips on where you can get started to help you build your strategic muscle. The very first one is to, fall in love with the craft of strategy and start to read the books that are out there. There are approximately 20 good books on product strategy that you can read. This doesn't have to be something you do tomorrow. Be something that you do that, over like the next couple of years. So number one is get into those books, because each book is related to each other and it really helps you kind of build your muscle over the long term. That's number one. Number two is start to analyze product launches that are done by the big companies, and write your one or two pager strategy on this launch yourself. So if Airbnb launches experiences, do your own analysis. Hey, what's Airbnb thinking? What is their contrast? How does this align to their core product? How are they going to expand? Which segments are they going after? How big is that market? So analyzing launches of companies that you respect, that's sort of a second way of doing that. And the third is we are going to make available to you, Shavi will share a link. It's productfaculty.com/Shavi. But you can go there, and we have 3 hours of videos on analyzing products like ChatGPT and Facebook Marketplace and all this other great resources that Shavi will also send out in the newsletter that she sends out. And that's sort of an additional way to learn, along with the books and along with the analysis that you do of the major companies that you respect and their products.
Speaking of mute, just getting to share the link with LinkedIn folks. Love that you mentioned there's so many resources out there already. I also personally compile a list of like strategies that I learned over the years. So make sure you check it out. I'm going to share the link to Mo's resources, and make sure you subscribe to our newsletter so that you get a recap of that. In the meantime, I think, Mo, before we stop, There's one more question that I want to touch upon that the one of the members have asked, which I think can bring it home. Our topic is about defining a compelling product strategy, right? A winning strategy. What do you think, in your opinion, are elements of a winning strategy? Do you have like a checklist to say, hey,
Yeah.
this product is a winning product if it hits, uh, this criteria? So yeah, what's your definition of a winning strategy?
Yeah, strategy is such a big topic. There's, product market fit strategy, expansion strategy, growth strategy. I'm going to define where I'm going to be focusing on. I'm going to be focusing on very, very early, 0 to 1, brand new idea. How do I tell if this is a good launch strategy? It simply comes down to this. If I look at my contrast meter, right, and that customer complaint against an existing way of doing things, if there is a big complaint against the existing way of doing things and this product that you're launching solves that, you will grow like wildfire. It doesn't matter how big your brand is, it doesn't matter what your resources are, it doesn't matter how many great employees you have, what it is, you're going to grow. If that isn't there, you're launching a me too undifferentiated product. Doesn't matter if all those other things are there, you're going to have lackluster growth. So going back to this, the number one quality I look at is on our contrast and complaint meter. How high is that? If that's high, I want to invest. Tell me where I can put my money down behind this product. If that isn't there, forget it.
I love that. That's the one gauge to like measure. Hey, do I want to put money into it? That's how you know, how well a product strategy is. And again, I put up the link. It's pretty easy URL, productfaculty.com/Shavi. Check out all the resources that Mo have made available for you. And obviously subscribe to our newsletter so that you can get a recap. So now we're at time, Mo. I wanted to finish with a lightning round of question, which we ask every one of our guests. Are you ready for the challenge? You can answer
Yes,
them
ready
in
for it.
60 seconds or less. All right. First, what is your current favorite product and why?
My current favorite product is FocusMate. It's a tool that allows you to keep accountable. I've done over 2,000 sessions on it. John Cutler is also a user of it,
Oh,
but
wow.
love that product and absolutely fantastic.
Focus mate. Need to check it out.
Yeah.
Okay. Second, um, throughout your decades of product career, who would you say is most influential in your thinking, your product role model?
This has to go to Marty Kagan, right? With he is a grandfather of product. I know everyone knows him, but I've recently went to a session that was coaching for coaches, and he's so passionate and he truly cares that his message is really empowering and something that we should follow. Don't you have to go for empowered teams as opposed to feature factory, and that's sort of something that I would say.
That's awesome. And for folks who want to get exposure to listen to Modi Kagan, don't forget to sign up for next Thursday session. We'll be doing one with him is focused specifically on product job search. Now, one final piece of advice. I know that we're sharing a resource, and that's very important. Anything else, any parting advice or resource that you like to share with folks to help them level up their product career?
Right. In terms of their product career, look, this just comes down to grit, right? At the end of the day, you got to be able to do what it takes to get things done. And if you can do that in an ego-less way, you're going to be successful, right? So put your egos aside, elevate what your customers are looking for, and go for that as opposed to saying that I'm the big thing. So egoless PMs that have a lot of grit, that's the way to go.
Egoless PM with grits. I love that. That's my takeaway for today, I think. Awesome. Thank you so much, Mo, for this lovely session. We're learning a lot from you. I think so is the LinkedIn community. A lot of folks are saying thank you. And so, yeah, make sure folks stay tuned. We'll send our recap of key takeaways from today's session. A lot of them, right? Like don't compete, contrast instead. The big complaints. Think about what's that for your product, right? Listening very closely, actively share a world wheel to ask different assumptions and questions in order to find a compelling product strategy. All right. Thank you so much, Mo, for spending time with us and sharing your wisdom. So we're lucky to have
Thank you
you.
very much. Yeah, thank you for hosting. Take
Bye.
care. Bye bye.